An analogy for user stories will be container in transportation industry. Our future activities will be around and inside these containers. 3 activities take place during discovery: storytelling, story listening, and story drafting. The last 2 are done by IT and needs to be done with art, experience, and knowledge. In story drafting, we need to be mindful of granularity, alignment, and interdependency of stories, and which one will be done in earlier sprints and which one will constitute a minimum viable product. User stories are told, written, and read in ubiquitous language, which is the normal business language that are made unambiguous during conversations in discovery. It is learned by business analysts and other folks in IT, and it is translated and told and taught to the rest of the multidisciplinary team in the next phases. User story focuses on what user needs are in plain business or English language, instead of what system should deliver or how system interaction should look like with other systems or with users. It does not have the ability to enter that domain. From that sense, we can say user story does not see what's happening under the hood. It's an analogy used by Alistair Cockburn, one of the Agile Manifesto participants. User story from that sense is a kind of incomplete, and we need that incompleteness. We will come back to that and find out how that gives more degree of freedom to designers and developers. User story deliberately leaves out a lot of details. During discovery, they appear as skeleton and placeholder. This helps to elicit more and more conversation in future activities that takes place in other phases. User story gets more complete as discussions are happening around hypotheses, design decisions, development issues, tests, defects, defects that require business input to resolve, demo feedbacks, and etc. etc. They get completed in just in time and just enough basis during alpha and beta. User stories can be considered relatively complete and first version out when MVP is live. Before that, activities such as regression test, demo feedback, interdependencies to other complete stories still can add detail or can change our story. When MVP is live, that's the earliest time that we can compile a document out of our story as the first version. That is why it is said that the later we document in Agile, the better. The later that we submit a document or documents in Agile, the better. Because the act of documentation, making notes and recording starts from early on, from the very first sessions. Use case was introduced by Ivar Jacobson in 1988, along with some other things such as UML and RUP. We looked at user story as a backbone of Agile. It is now time to review use case in order to make a comparison with pre-Agile requirement studies and also to keep in mind that the use case will continue to be a better choice in certain engagements. Use case is heavily scripted and templated in order to make it clear in black and white for developers that how system is supposed to work in granular level, step by step, what user does and how system responds to complete that goal, including happy paths and other paths. This is an example of big design upfront. There are certain engagements that big design upfront will be more fruitful. For example, when there are more known in the product than unknown. The promise of use case is to create clear and unambiguous version of requirement upfront in a language that IT speaks and understands, developers can read. This therefore saves a lot of conversation. It achieves clarity through template and script. Use case is clear enough that it can be handed over to the next team, to development, and the team that created the use case can get out of the way. There is no need for a multidisciplinary team to elaborate or to interpret the content. Now we compare the two, use case versus user story, that each offer a different approach to requirements or discovery phase. Use case removes ambiguity from language early on. It closes the deal in a contract-like text that all parties are obliged to follow after sign-off. It elevates the knowledge of discovery or requirement and enters into design territory in the UI section. That limits the choices of designer when it comes to user system interaction. It is as if there is no alpha phase for, for the UI design as we dive into the first good idea that comes into mind during requirement study. Here's a question. Can we do use case in Agile or in Double? The answer is yes, we can do that. It is, however, not recommended. We have to use our discretion depending on the situation and uniqueness of a product or a project. In contrast, user story aims to avoid early and arbitrary closure on understanding of the requirement. It engages everyone in brainstorming a practice of exchange of idea. Instead of a finalized black and white text, it will end up with a language that is gradually understood by everyone and is gradually more associated to the working software. It taps into the mind of product owner, business, product manager, BAs, designers, developers, testers, user experience designers in a framework that accept change even late in the game. And by keeping the conversation going, it tries to avoid the rigidity in design, a rigidity that could be premature. Use case assumes that language is a value neutral and objective tool in and of itself. And by writing clear terms in steps, it aims to create a working software exactly based on requirement. In contrast, user story alters the language through conversation. Every time after each discussion in our multidisciplinary team, we reach a new negotiated meaning and our user story gets updated and go through a even more evolution. And through that, it gets more aligned with the working software and closer to the code, and inherent conflict and contradictions are removed from the language. Let's go back to a basic definition. Language is a practice or the practice of meaning making, and that meaning is aimed to be understood equally by everyone in a social group. That is not usually achieved easily. In writing, reading, speaking, or listening, there are always a source or the speaker or story maker, and there is an audience, the other person, and then there is an interaction takes place. Therefore, things could fall into the gap and not get across. In technical conversations, we are bound by the same limitation in language as always, yet in these kinds we need even more clarity. In agile conversation, the objective is to achieve more in quality and innovation with a stress on both words, and save more through exchange of ideas. This is based on the principle in Agile Manifesto that face-to-face conversation will do wonder. But in that conversation, we have a clear objective. We don't want to go all over the place. The, the more crisp and focused the language gets through conversation as it continues, we achieve more in result. Agile conversation makes language unambiguous, crisp, concise, minimal, and let's add actionable because it gets closer and reflects better the characteristics and features of the working software itself, the code. Now, can template do the same? Well, a template is not a substitute for those conversations. If it is used as a substitute for conversation to achieve clarity quickly and early, then maybe that is at least part of a good number of patches that we have to apply once the software go live. Continuing our discussion on storytelling and story listening, activities that start in discovery but do not end there. After enough listening and a good comprehension of business activities, then we put the first version of our user story down in writing. When a user story comes to life on paper during story drafting or story mapping, from that point on, it is only waiting to get better, expanded, modified, refined, and get more comprehensive and reflects all the aspects of that function or feature. Events that update our user stories, for example, not limited to, making a prototype, elimination of some hypotheses, development discussions that change one or other algorithms, design decisions that change the UI, feedback from business during sprint demo that is implemented, defect resolution and its consequences. As the text of our user story changes, alters, expands, it is actually our glossary that is undergoing a change. It is the definition of words, terms, events, roles, etc. that are changing. It is our common language that are going through a modification, the ubiquitous language. As we sat down with business during discovery and started with open-ended question and acting as good listeners, we were learning that common language, a language that belonged to the problem domain or problem space. At that time, our user stories were just a placeholder, were skeleton user stories. Then the change in the text of our user story in the next phases means that our common language gets more and more unambiguous. This is the language, that common language that belongs to solution domain or solution space. It is not developed on the air. In fact, as we go on, it gets closer and closer and reflect better and better the characteristic of working software, our solution, the product. As we move from one activity to another and from one sprint to the next, it is our duty to ensure that the language used in user stories and in all other Agile documents truly reflect the activities of in the multidisciplinary team. Decisions, agreements, negotiated meanings, and the language is more accurate, detailed, yet minimal, crisp, uninterpretable, unambiguous, and even actionable, as it represents the working software in a true sense. In fact, it should be a copy of our working software, this one in human language. One could wonder which copy will outlast the other. When the working software is decommissioned sometimes in the future, this copy could continue to contribute toward the next generation of our products. The unambiguous common language, that is. We learned the common language during storytelling and story listening, and we monitored and supervised its growth and refinement during the activities of multidisciplinary team. So it is now at our disposal to create any document in that language. But still, we need to be mindful of two things when creating any writing in that language. First is purpose. Why do we write? Is the document we create going to be helping in creation of our working software or anywhere later in its life cycle, or going to train the end user or the operation folks, or going to explain the pieces and the components by architects? There must be a clear purpose, a purpose that is related to the life of our working software. Second, genuineness. The people who are doing the document or writing are part of the multidisciplinary team that is involved in creation of working software, or they are belong to some parallel group that have little or no access to that team and are only tasked to write document. The latter is not desirable, and what is created by that team will not pass the test of time. It will end up on the shelf. Or let's say it is likely to. What about documentation other than user stories or user related documents? For example, technical writing. They too need to be mindful and utilizing the unambiguous common language. It seems that all writings are of one of these two categories. They're either story of users or they are story of the application. For application such as network design, cloud registration details, architecture pieces and components, design, software design and UI, any bird's eye view from one point or another that shows how components fit and work together, etc. However, all the technical work, decisions, setup, test are also done in the multidisciplinary team that business was present in and the product owner. Some of their consequences were discussed and demoed at the end of each sprint to product owner. Therefore, it was all one journey, and one can say that it is all one story. Story of an acquaintance in discovery and a purposeful journey together that followed. At the end of this course, I'd like to review some of the principles from Agile Manifesto and reflect on them. 1. Our highest priority is to satisfy customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable products. Well, for one reason, if we wait until the end of development and show the result to customer, not to mention that go live and deliver, the chances are that they don't like it or some of the functions don't satisfy the business operation. They ask for changes, modification, delete. Chances are that they don't like it or some of the functions don't satisfy the business operation. They ask for changes, modification. They ask for changes, modification, enhancement, and each will result in number of patches that we need to apply after go live, and that is, as we all know, are costly, very costly. Welcome changing requirements even late in development. We accepted to not to close the deal of requirement and bring the customer or business along with us in the multidisciplinary team and keep receiving feedback from them and giving feedback to them for technical issues or technical depths kind of matters, etc. Therefore, We are also ready to accept their feedback even late in development. Accepting late in development any feedback is much less costly than applying patches afterward. 3. Business and software engineers, let's say the entire IT team, must work together daily throughout the project. Here are some of the activities that IT and business will be doing together in the team. Business is present in every sprint, and result of each sprint will be demoed to business. Each defect will be clarified by BAs or product managers. The spirit of each story requirements are not signed or handed over, and everyone is in the room to make a decision to save cost for the organization and get a better output. Let that happen. Build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Trusting motivated individuals seems intuitive, but let's consider all the borders that can confine motivated individuals, the borders of their roles, the tools, the methodologies, etc., etc. Thanks to research such as those done by Alistair Cockburn, one of the Agile Manifesto contributors, it is people who need to be given the first order importance and not the disciplines. That's why Agile is a low discipline methodology, trying to tap into the energy and the brain of motivated individuals. The best architecture, 5. The best architecture requirements designs emerge from self-organizing teams. The theme in all the principles seems to be consistent and the subjects or ideas are overlapping. Self-organizing teams are people who are interacting with each other in different expertise. They are not working in silos, handing over the result. They exchange ideas, they speak the common language. They look at things from different point of views. And they have the autonomy and they can change things on an as needed basis. 6. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. While this is self-explanatory, it still needs a bit of conversation. As extreme programming veterans before Agile said, Yagni, you are not gonna need it. If you're not gonna need that big documents, that particular feature, that complex stack of components in architecture, or convoluted, let's say, algorithm, then let's not do it. It is difficult to maintain later and is going to cost more. Simplicity also involves, at some point, involves bravery to say this entire product is going to be super flawless. Stop the development. Let's not go to the next step. Or no matter how much cost it's done, we need to stop it. Maximizing the amount of work not done also has a connotation on methodologies, rejecting heavy or high discipline methodologies as discussed. 7. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within software engineering team, let's say the multidisciplinary team that includes business, is face-to-face conversation. And this is not intuitive because we thought that, or at least I thought, that a black and white written document is the most crisp and unambiguous way of conveying an idea. No one can interpret that differently. Through the rest of this story, we will see the more on the wonder of face to face and these days screen to screen conversations. Thank you for bearing with me through the materials. Let's go to Thank you for bearing with me through the materials. Let's go to questions now.